Welcome to the Love Lab Podcast, a safe and fun place to get real and learn about sex. Whether you're a man or woman, single or couple, this is the show for you. I am your host, Kevin Anthony, and I am here to guide you to go from good to amazing in the bedroom and your relationships. All right, welcome back to the Love Lab Podcast. This is episode 294, and it's titled 12 Questions for Love, How to Improve Your Relationships by Asking Better Questions. If you have been a listener of this show for any length of time, you know that Celine was, and I am, a huge proponent of good communication in a relationship. We've done so many episodes on different aspects of how do you have really good communication in a relationship, because you can have the attraction, you can have, the great sex, you can have a lot of different things in your relationship, but if you aren't communicating well, it's not likely to be a smooth, harmonious, and long-lasting relationship. There's just too many problems that creep in when you can't communicate well. And asking questions, really good questions, is an essential part of that communication process. And so I have a guest on today. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see him. We are going to talk about a whole bunch of different things. So we're going to talk about, why is it important to ask good questions? How do you ask good questions? Like, how do you formulate a good question, right? Are there any sort of guidelines for how this process goes? And then, of course, in the title I mentioned there's 12 questions for love. So we're going to talk about what are those specific questions, because he's kind of created a formula of questions to help you through this process. So there's a ton to talk about today. I've actually been really excited to have this conversation. I have been so fortunate lately that I've been having really amazing people come on, and the conversations have been so powerful and the feedback has been amazing. And I think that today's show is going to be one of those. So I'm really excited about that. Before we get there, as always, a short word from my sponsor. Power and Mastery 3.0 is here. The men's sexual mastery program you have heard about on this show for a long time is now even better. I've personally reviewed every module, lesson, video, audio, and PDF to see if there's anything new that needed to be added. As a result, I have added 10 new videos, 1 new audio, 8 new PDFs, and dozens of links to handpick products to help support your journey to mastery. In addition, there is also a brand new user interface that makes it easier to navigate the course and find your course materials. So if you are ready to become the sexual master you have always wanted to be, then go now to powerandmastery.com. By the way, did you also know, you've heard me talk about this a lot on the show, this course, did you also know that there is an app now? It's like a dedicated app, so you don't have to clumsily go through your phone or your tablet in order to access this. You don't have to be in front of your computer. There is a dedicated app that allows you to go through the entire course. So check that out at powerandmastery.com. Okay, my guest today is Topaz Adizes. He is an Emmy Award-winning writer, director, and experience design architect. He is an Edmund Hillary Fellow and Sundance/Skull Stories of Change Fellow. His work has been selected to Cannes, Sundance, IDFA, and South by Southwest, featured in New Yorker Magazine, Vanity Fair, and the New York Times. He's garnered an Emmy for New Approaches to Documentary and 2 World Press Photo Awards for immersive storytelling and interactive documentary. He is currently the founder and executive director of the experience design studio, The Skin Deep. Topaz studied philosophy at UC Berkeley and Oxford University. He speaks 4 languages and currently lives in Mexico with his wife and 2 children. Welcome to the show, Topaz.
Hey, Kevin. Good to be here, man. Thank you so much.
That is quite an impressive resume. What language would you like to have the show in today? I'm just kidding.
No, let's stick to English. Let's stick to English because my other languages are not so polished.
No worries. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Let's stick to English.
All right. So what we're talking about today is questions and communication and all of that. So I want to just start, we always have to lay a little bit of groundwork here. So the questions are part of having a conversation. And what I'm curious about is, why is it important to be able to have good conversations?
Oh, that's a great question. I think even before that is what's the experience that I've had that gives me even any insight into the power of questions. And it comes from, 10 years. We're now in our 11th year of doing the And, which is a project that is what won the Emmy for New Approaches documentary. And that is basically where we brought all kinds of people, all kinds of pairs on all kinds of relationships facing one another, and we gave them questions. We've been doing that for 10 years, over 1,200 conversations. And my team and I have learned what works and what doesn't work. And that's basically what's distilled in the book. But that's basically the premise or the experience that I've seen and witnessed and tested that gives me my opinion that I want to share today. So that's right. Go ahead.
I just want to pause you. How did that get started? What was the impetus for starting that process, that project?
Well, I was in 2013, I was filmmaker, making films, going to festivals, and someone called me and said, "Hey, Topaz, let's make a movie about, something about, and he called it the skin deep. Why he asked me a question about, he wanted to make a documentary about why good-looking people do better than those who are not, which was kind of very superficial. And I said, well, hold on. But as a filmmaker, if you have an investor, you're like, oh, this is a great opportunity. Let me come back to you. And I looked around at that time. It was 2013. And what was really interesting and continues to be interesting is the fact that the emotional experience of being human is shifting in the lieu of all this technology that's coming our way, right? We are connecting in different ways because we have social media, because we have FaceTime and WhatsApp, and we could find different communities and different partners and different expressions of ourselves and find different information to explore ourselves all online. And so the emotional experience, what does love mean? What does intimacy mean? What does connection mean? What does loneliness mean? Is shifting, it's changing because of the technology that we have available that's shifting the way we're relating to each other. And so that's what really interested me. And so that's kind of was the impetus for me to launch thing. That investor actually ended up not joining the journey 2 days before we started, which was actually a blessing. And we continued on, and the whole time the question is, how's the emotional experience of being human shifted? And then out of that came the And, which is this project. It's about the space between. It's about our relationships. It's about creating all vulnerable, honest conversations and what can we learn from each other. And that's where it came from.
Cool. Well, thanks for laying that foundation, because you're right. It is important for people to understand, why you're here talking about this particular subject.
But so go to your thing, like, why is it important to ask questions? It's just simply because there is so much energy. There are so many nutrients in the relationships in our lives. There is so much that when we tap into those threads of connection, there's so much vibrancy. There's so much energy. Now, they might be uncomfortable. It might be a lot of fun, but either way, there's a lot to explore that will give you a greater sense of what it means to be alive, a more fulfilling sense of the relationship that you have, and also a more resilient one if you weather the storms of some discomfort. Yeah, I think oftentimes our closest relationship are the ones we take for granted, and the ones yet who have the greatest deal of payoff if we are going to explore it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And isn't that so ironic that the relationships that are most important to us, which are usually the ones that are closest to us, are often the ones that we will put the least effort into when it comes to things like communication, because we take it for granted, right? We go, well, they know me and they know what I mean, right? Like, we do stuff like that all the time. Oh, they already know this about me. They know what I mean. They get it, right? And then yet with somebody that we don't know, we're like, well, I better make sure they understand me, right? When it's really actually more important to nurture those relationships close to you and make sure that they understand and not take it for granted. So yeah, I completely agree with what you said. So if we understand why it's important to have good conversations, I'm wondering next, what are some of the requirements for having a good conversation? I know you outlined that in the book, some of the sort of ground rules for like, how do you have a good quality conversation?
There's really two things, quite simple. The space, the intention, right? The space, the intention, why are we here? And well-constructed questions. Those are really the two ingredients that you need. That's it.
Okay, let's talk about each one of those for
Yeah.
for a minute.
So, well, the space is simply, if your partner comes to you or someone comes to you and says, "Why do you love me?" out of the blue, while you're washing dishes or in the garden or whatnot, coming back home, you're not wondering why you love them. You're wondering why they're asking you the question. Where's the intention? What's the context? If we play a card game, right? And we're playing a game of connection. Yeah, I'm holding an addition in my hand. And you randomly choose a question, why do you love me? Well, then the space has been created. You're not wondering why the person's asking you. The space has been created for permission to give and to receive. And so the space is simply creating the space of intention, of understanding, of answering these questions such that permission can be given so we can actually answer the question and go deeper, right?
Yeah. So simple as that sounds, I want to pause you for a moment.
Yeah.
Because as a coach in this space, this is something where I see that people struggle with. In other words, they will do exactly what you just said, especially, there's something not right in the relationship. It's been bugging her for, X amount of time. And then in the middle of nowhere, it'll be in the car ride on the way to your kid's friend's birthday party or whatever it is. All of a sudden, boom, here it comes, right? And there's been no space created. There's been no real intention set. And then you catch the person off guard. You sort of blindside them with this, deep question. And then it's like, what do I say, right? So the idea of taking the time to really create the space is actually very, very important. And that might mean, right, something along the lines of, hey, I'd really like to have a conversation. Can we schedule some time? And it might be a day or two or whatever in the future, but you're intentionally setting aside that time. Like, this is the time, like, block it off in your calendar, put your phone down. We're going to actually have a conversation here. So yeah, I agree. Setting that intention is huge.
Well, we should just be aware that there's different rules in different spaces, both physically, but also emotionally, right? I mean, you do certain things in the kitchen, you do different things in the living room or the bedroom or the bathroom, right? You're not going to shower in the kitchen and you're not going to cook in the bathroom, right? And so we have an understanding, there's certain behaviors, there's certain rules, there's certain guidelines that we have in certain spaces, but we can do the same thing when we have emotional conversations, right? And that gives us freedom because we know there's permission to have this kind of conversation. If you come home and you ask your partner, hey, you not ask, you tell them why you love them. They're not the flip side of what I said about asking a question, but you just tell them, let me tell you, I just want you to know why I love you so much. And you let them know. They're actually not going to be able to really receive that because they don't know where you're coming from. Right? It's nice, but they're wondering also, where's this coming from? Now, if we can make the practice of creating the space, whether, usually we create the space because there's a problem at hand and you get that famous line that says, we got to talk. And you hear, we got to talk. And everyone's like, oh, wait, right? That means because there has been discomfort growing. There has been things unsaid that have been festering and growing to the point that it's so painful that the pain of not speaking about it is greater than not speaking. Therefore, we have to have a conversation. We've got to talk. And you're like, now a better practice is let's just once a week have a touch base. Every evening, let's ask ourselves a question or just create the space to watch the sunset and just talk. That alleviates this building pressure that may happen. And if it does happen, because sometimes you have kids and you have things and you're working on a trip and you need to have that conversation to kind of alleviate the pressure and to tend to the weeds in the garden of the relationship, then let's create the space for that. Hey, let's create the time, like you said. That's why road trips sometimes are great because you're in the car and you can listen to a podcast or the radio, but at some point, there's nowhere to go. It's just you two. It's just you guys. And that's a wonderful space to just say, hey, let's play a game or let's have a conversation. Let's ask a question. How do we create the space so that we can ask, so that we can give each other permission to ask questions and receive answers?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's just key, just bringing conscientiousness. It doesn't necessarily have to be lighting a candle, incense. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. It can just be intention and understanding. Hey, we're going to have a chat about this right now, which is different chat than what's the shopping list? Or we need to solve this problem right now because the house is on fire. or we have to deal with this problem. There's different rules that you behave in certain conversations depending on what is. And if you need to have an exploratory conversation, it's one conversation. If we need to get to a solution at the end of this conversation, it's a slightly different kind of conversation.
Yeah, I love that. I love the nuance of, certain types of conversations in certain places and at certain times. That's a great little sort of nuance to bring into it. And I love also the idea of, like you mentioned, having a conversation in the car. My wife and I, we used to all the time, like when we go on road trips, we'd say, hey, let's listen to whatever, whether it's like a certain kind of music or a podcast or whatever. And then we'd be like 3 hours in the car and we'd realize we never even turned the stereo on. And that would happen literally every time we went somewhere. And to the point where we didn't even bother saying that, because we would just talk the entire time. We would just talk. And we, obviously lived together because we were married, but, we also worked together and we both worked from home. We were around each other 24/7. And yet still we would get in the car and we would talk for 3 hours straight. So.
Well, which is a beautiful thing. And one thing that brings up for me is because with the book, one of the comments I've seen is, well, if you love each other and you're really connected, you don't need questions. The conversation will flow on its own. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think you can have a great deal of love and admiration for someone, but sometimes you're in the same patterns of conversation. You think you know this other person perfectly because you've been with them for 15 years. But you've changed yourself. They've changed. How do we ask each other questions that really reveal the evolution that we're going through, the change that we're going through, the nuances we're going through? How to create the new space of exploration in a relationship that you've been in a long time? So not to confound, the love you have for someone does not mean that you always are having a good conversation. You might not have a good conversation, but have a deep love for them. And maybe that's a bridge you need to get, right? And that's kind of the offering I'm asking is, or I'm offering, not asking, but offering is how to ask really good, well-constructed questions.
Yes, which we're going to get to in a moment for sure. That's going to be a really important part of this conversation. But I do want to come back to the fact that you're right. Just because you're talking does not necessarily mean that what you're talking about is deep, right? Because you could sit there for that 3-hour car drive and just talk about nonsense, the latest pop culture, crap or TV shows or whatever, but you're not really getting to the depth of who that person is. And I also like the point that you brought up is that we are constantly changing. One of the other things that my wife and I used to do is at least once a year, we would sit down and do a check-in with, how is the relationship going for you? Where are you at now? Right? Because we were aware of the fact that we are constantly changing. But these are things that a lot of people don't do and should do. My listeners know, of course, that Celine has passed away. And I've been dating somebody new recently. And the other night she was over and it was, nighttime. And it's like, there's lots of things you could potentially do at night. And I said, well, what do you want to do? And she's like, oh, I don't know. I said, I got an idea. Let's play a game. So I just grabbed her hand. I took her into the other room. We sat down on the couch and I said, here's what the game is going to be. The game is, I'm going to tell you something that you don't know about me. And then you're going to tell me something and we're going to go back and forth like that. Just stuff that I don't know about you, right? It could be anything. It could be something really simple or some accomplishment you've had or whatever. This was actually a game that my wife Celine had introduced into our relationship. And it's an amazing way to get to know somebody, especially, when they're new to you.
Absolutely. And it's beautiful, right? After that conversation with her, did you feel closer to her? Did you feel more attracted to her? What did you feel after that conversation? And what do you think she felt?
Definitely closer for sure. I learned some new things. And, this is somebody that I've known casually for many years. It's only recently that we've come together in a dating scenario. So obviously there's a lot of details in her life that I have no idea about. But I definitely felt closer because I was like, wow, I actually learned some really cool things about who you are as a person. And a lot of the stuff that we shared was, things from when we were much younger, right? That people, even our good friends probably don't know about us.
So what I find really interesting is that even though the story may be the same, because sometimes stories change, but let's just say the story is the same. So she tells you a story about her childhood, this story about losing her dog or something. That story may stay the same. But in a year and a half from now, 2 years, you have a deeper relationship with this person. You've lived 2 years with her or something, and you've seen her at a new level. When she tells you that story again about whatever, losing the dog, for instance, making this up, because you've been with her for 2 years, because you've seen what she's been into and who she is, maybe you'll understand that story now in a different way than the first time you heard it when you only knew each other for 2 months.
Oh, that's
right?
entirely possible. Yeah.
Right. Because oh, actually, now that I know you better, and I know that you have maybe, when people leave, you get a bit anxiety. Maybe it's because you lost your dog when you were 4 years old. And when I first heard that story, I didn't fully understand how that played in the makeup of your character. Right. But now that I've seen you for 2 years and how you relate to other people in the family, and we've had experiences together, well, I guess my point is that just because you've heard a story once or an answer once doesn't mean that the answer doesn't change, even if the actual answer is exactly the same. Your understanding of that person has shifted because you've seen them in different light. And we are built in our to survive, to make things simple and comfortable. Right. So therefore, we compartmentalize. Oh, I know this person, they rehab like this, they're like this, and they're doing the same thing to you. And what we miss out by that innate, we're building ourselves to be comfortable and to survive. So we're missing out on all this beautiful nuance of what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to have these emotions that shift and change, and we're evolving and we're growing and we're having these temporal experiences that are, enlarging our souls or not. How do we share that? And when we share that, we get a sense of what it means to be human. We get a sense of humanity. And there's a lot of energy in that. I'm just going back to your first question. Why to have these conversations? Because it reinvigorates your sense of being alive. It reinvigorates your sense of being human. But we don't go into that because maybe it's uncomfortable. Maybe because we want stability and comfort and safety, and yet we're missing the payoff. And by the way, we shouldn't confound safety and discomfort. Like safety and comfort, you can have safety and also discomfort.
Oh, yes.
They're two separate things.
Absolutely. It's an interesting point that you bring up about, it bringing us closer to our humanity. An unfortunate thing that I see happening throughout our culture these days is they're intentionally trying to take us away from our humanity. They're trying to make us more like machines than actual humans. And I think a practice like this is something that could actually sort of re-engage us with our humanity, which is truly, truly important. So that is an interesting point. So there were two things that were necessary for a good conversation. We covered the first one. Let's talk about the second one.
Well-constructed questions, and questions shape the answer, right? Just like a race course shapes the races that the cars are running or you're running on, the question shapes the answer. If I ask my kids, do you guys want to go to sleep now or later? Then those are the two options, now or later. They're going to be later for sure. But if I say, oh, you want to sleep in the bed? You want to sleep in mom's bed, or you want to sleep in your own bed? The option is they're going to sleep. The question is in which bed? So the question shapes the answer. And we are always asking ourselves questions all the time. You wake up in the morning, you have a thought. We don't realize that thought is an answer to a question. So if we change the question, don't focus on the answer, focus on the question. Change the question, changes your opportunities, changes the possibilities. So in context of a relationship, there are 5 things that my team and I have seen that really help in constructing good questions when it comes to a relationship. The first one is, don't make it binary. What do you love me? Yes, no. Did you have a good day? Yes, no. Okay. There's nothing that's going to end a conversation quicker than yes or no. So asking binary questions doesn't create the space. So just say do you love me? Yes, no. How do you love me? What does my love feel like? What do you think my love feels like? What do you think your love feels like to me? Asking questions that are open-ended, to create more possibilities for exploration. Invite someone in. Second one is asking questions that don't have an agenda. You can feel it when someone asks you a question that maybe they know the answer to, or they're setting you up like in a chess match. They're playing chess with you and they're asking you a decoy question because they're leading you in, and you could feel it. You know it. And so when you ask a question, if you're coming with an agenda, it's much harder for that person to really engage with you openly because they can feel it. It's much harder to shake a hand that's got a finger pointing at you than an open hand that's offering you its palm. So ask a question that's really rooted in curiosity. Or if you do feel the judgment in your question that before you ask it, find the root of an angle to it that's curious. Notice, oh, you know what? I'm really angry about this thing that you did. And you're thinking in your head. And you want to go, hey, why'd you do that? Wait. Shift it. Find the curiosity. You know what? I'm feeling a bit of anxiety around that. It hurt me. And I'm really curious why you did that. That is a different invitation than why'd you do that? So come to questions with, and if you can't, be aware if you have an agenda hidden, then tap into your curiosity, acknowledge maybe the pain or the discomfort or whatever, and acknowledge, and then ask a curious question. That's more of an offering. That creates a space for them to step in. Third one is make questions constructive. Going back to how the question shapes the course. If you ask a question, why do we fight so much? You get a list of why we fight so much, because your mind is built to protect you. It's built to deliver the answers, whatever you ask it. The heart's built to connect you. So ask questions that are going to empower the heart and connection. So instead of saying, why do we fight so much? You can shift that into, what's our biggest challenge right now? And what do you think it's teaching us? Why do you think we're having so many challenges this week? What's the hidden lesson in it? Why do we have this conflict? But what's the hidden gift in it? What is it? Where is the opportunity for us in this conflict? Right? So you're already shaping the question there to be more constructive and empowering. That's the power of the question, shaping the answer. Another one is connecting two ideas. So those are the three. The fourth one would be connecting two ideas that don't only come in contact with each other. How does conflict make us better? Usually we see conflict as bad. How does conflict make us better? Then now your mind is racing to answer the question. Ooh, okay, I want to find a way that conflict is making us better. Right? How much is our effort to earn money costing us? Right? How much is, we don't really often asking questions that connect two different ideas creates a space of, oh, wait, we need to find the path there. And there's a lot of things to learn from that exploration. The flip side of that, or another way of asking, is asking questions that put one another in each other's shoes. When was the last time you felt that I was disappointed in you? Okay. And why do you think I did? So that puts you in my shoes. Now you're going to be looking at yourself, like at what action you did. And when was the last time Topaz felt disappointed? Okay. So putting each other in each other's shoes is a great way to create empathy and understanding. Right. And then the last one, and one of the biggest ones, is all these questions acknowledge the connection. They're acknowledging, asking. So oftentimes we ask questions, hey, Kevin, what do you think about love? All right. And if your new partner asks you, what do you think about love? And if the stranger on the street says, hey, what do you think about love? You'll probably answer that question in the same way, regardless of who's asking. It's not acknowledging the relationship of the conversation you're in. Instead, if I said, hey, Kevin, how do you think we think about love differently? How do you think we think about love the same? If I ask you that question and the person you're dating now and the stranger asks you that question, you would answer those three questions differently because three different people are asking it to you and you have a different relationship with each one of them. So asking a question that acknowledges the connection creates a lot more space of exploration versus, what do you think about love? Now you just tell me, and it's not acknowledging that, hey, we're in a conversation here. We have a connection. Those are the 5 things that I've noticed that really, if you can include some of them or all of them, really helps build powerful questions in the context of a relationship.
Yeah, that was absolutely huge. And thank you so much for sharing it. I didn't want to interrupt that because it was just so perfect the way that it was. I would suggest listeners, if you didn't get all of that, when the show is over, go back and listen to it again. We'll also give you an opportunity to find out where you can get the book written about this so you can actually read it over and over again, and where there's a far more explanation and detail in it. But if you could just master those 5 things, I guarantee you that your level of communication in your relationship and the depth of your connection would be exponentially better than it is now.
The bottom line, if you want a tagline, is stop looking for answers. Create better questions. Focus all your energy on asking better questions, and the answer will then be obvious and more empowering.
Yeah. And
don't focus on the answer. Focus on the question.
That is a sort of universal truth in all of life, right? Like if you look in any area, right, you should be asking better questions. If we look at science, right, science is supposed to ask really good questions. Instead, what we mostly get is, this is the answer we want. How do we reverse engineer to get to that, right? Which is mostly what we do these days. But the whole premise of the scientific method is to ask really good questions and see where they lead you. We could go on and on and on. Politics, same deal. There's a predefined, agenda, conclusion, and then we try to work backwards through it, right? Whereas the reality is, if we really want anything good out of this life or world, we just need to ask better questions and let those questions lead us to the answer. And the exact same thing is true here in our relationships.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we know why it's important to ask good questions. We know the 2 things that are required for that. And we also covered the 5 things, to construct a good question. So then there's a part to asking good questions or having this conversation that we haven't talked about yet. And I want to come to that next, but I need to take a short break, and then we'll come back and talk about that. Are you a couple? Are your relationship and sex life where you want them to be? Are there changes you would like to make but just don't know how? Maybe you think there is nothing that can be done. If you're not 100% happy with where your relationship or sex life is, then get help today and change your life. Go to kevinandceline.com/sex-coaching-couples and schedule a strategy call with me today so we can map out a strategy to get you where you want to be so that you can have it all your way. That is kevinandceline.com/sex-coaching-couples and book your strategy call today. The link is in the description. So before the ad, I mentioned there was a piece that we hadn't covered yet, which is really, really important to this process. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the importance of listening, because it's one thing to ask a question, but what if the person on the other side isn't really listening to you when you ask the question? Or what if you're not really listening when they're giving you the answer, right? So there's this important piece of listening on both ends.
I couldn't agree more. And I call it in the book deep listening. And this is something that I've seen from incredible conversations on the end, from the last 10 years, 1,200 pairs. I've really seen there's a different thing that we drop into when we're really feeling to listen. What I call deep listening. It's like listening to your body. And it's bypassing the mind that first wants to respond. Oftentimes, a lot of the time, we're in conversations with our minds are talking to each other, and they're built to protect, not to connect, like I mentioned before. And so you're having a conversation, you're listening to someone, and you're already thinking about, how am I going to respond? How am I going to win this argument? How am I going to make sure I sound smart, or that I'm right? What? And you're not actually really taking in what you are being offered, right? And that's fine, but that's how we operate in day-to-day life. But with the intimate relationships, what I suggest is tapping into the body, because as you know, the body is a repository of the software of our consciousness. There are, in our bodies, we could feel where the tension is. You could feel where the anxiety is. You could feel where the joy is at. So in conversation, check in with the body, breathe, listen to the body, what's coming up, and bypass the inclination to respond through the head, because the head is there to just protect. And one way is that often, look, we did the end. We had blind dates. This is where it first came up for me. And we did a bunch of blind dates. And there was one question that I put in, which we got, and I was amazed. I got the same answer every time, regardless of, the background or the relationship or the gender expression. The answer was pretty much the same 95% of the time. And the question was, why do you think I'm still single? And the answer was the same every time. Because you're still trying to figure yourself out. And I was just so blown away. Like, wait, how can all these different people who have different experiences, these are all strangers talking to each other, they all are saying the same answer? It's like, wait, this is a societal programming. This is what we are taught or what we see as kind of the reason why, justification of why someone is single or not. Unless being single, there's no justification needed. So, but what I'm saying is that that's what we tell ourselves. Oh, I'm figuring myself out. Well, there is a lot in our conversations, there are a lot of scripts in our conversations that we are responding to one another in kind of a societal programming mode, right? Where very simple examples like, how's your day? Great. Now, what's the weather like over there? Fine, good, bad. What's the weather like? That's a societal programming questioning just to break the ice, right? Listen to the body, drop in, and respond from there. It creates another space of really tapping into something that's really going on. It takes it to another level, right? You're not just responding from the head, you're responding from the heart. The heart, the body, to me, the same thing, right? I don't want to make these, and I don't even want to separate actually the mind from the heart because they're connected. But what's in service of what?
Yeah, I mean that is a huge piece. It's interesting. One of the thoughts that came up for me when I was listening to you talk about that was this is something that I used to experience with my father a lot when I was younger. In other words, he would ask those kind of basic questions. Oh, how was your day? How was the whatever, and I would answer those questions, but then I would get that same question maybe either later on or something else, which started to clue me in that I wasn't really listening to the answers. Right. So eventually I just stopped wanting to answer the questions. So then he would say, how's the blah, 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 whatever. And I'm just like, and I basically would blow it off and not answer it, because from my point of view at that point, it was like, why should I bother answering this question? You don't listen to the answers anyway. And I know that because you keep asking me the same questions about things I already told you, And so that actually created quite a strain in our relationship when I was younger.
And I'm sure you loved him. I'm sure you guys had a form of love. Well, I'm not sure, maybe not, but there are often times I have with my own father where we're sitting there, and I know I love my father dearly, and he loves me dearly, but we don't know what questions to ask because we know the questions that we do ask we're not the same scripted kind of pattern conversation. He's going to try to solve my problem, right? And there's a pattern there. There's a pattern in relationships. How do we break the pattern? Asking different questions. Here's a really good question to ask. What's something you really want me to know? What's something you think I want you to know? See how that puts him in your shoes? Now, once you throw that question out of the blue, it's like, wait, where's this coming from? If you say instead, you like, listen, I was reading a book or this card game, or let's do a little experiment and ask each other different questions. Okay, so then you just created this space and intention where these questions are coming from. Then you ask this question that puts each other's shoes. It's unexpected. The first response would generally be like, wait, what? Okay, let me think about that. And allow that space, right? Because you're asking a different question that we're not normally asked. And so allowing for that space. And then hopefully that person who's going to answer that breath, that pause they have is their form of deeper listening, of listening to the body, of the mind trying to find a new connection between two ideas that hasn't been done before. And so there's a lot of beauty in allowing for that to happen, right? And there's a big payoff. There's a big dopamine payoff on the end of that answer. You ask that question, you create the space, they'll get the answer. There's a big payoff on the other side of that.
Yeah, I like that idea of, asking the different questions, because, if you're asking the same questions all the time, you're right. People just get into patterns, and there are these default responses that come to those answers. But if you ask them something that they don't have a default response to, now they got to think about it. Right.
I like to say, like, they got to feel about it. Now they have to feel. Hopefully they feel that's what we're talking about. Listening is feeling to listen. If you can tap into your body more, listen from there, and trust that the answers will come. Trust that, we will resolve whatever we have to resolve, or we will, but you will come across new spaces in your relationship if you feel through them versus think through them.
Well, that is a good point too. Our minds can come up with all kinds of interesting justifications for the things that we say, and our bodies never lie. So yeah, it's great to feel into it. I would say that for women, that's probably pretty easy. That's usually their default mode. They tend to feel a lot more than we do as men. So it's kind of a more advanced skill for the men. Is like, how do we feel? One of the biggest things that I see with my male clients, and that my wife used to see for many years, she would say this after almost every first session with a new male client. She would say, "Oh boy, he's going to be a tough one. He's really stuck in his head. He's just all up here in the mental blah, blah, blah." It's super common. So that's going to be a skill, men, that if you are not good at, you're going to have to practice. You're going to have to work on getting sort of out of your analytical problem solving mind and getting into the feeling more about what is it you really feel, especially when we're talking about relationships.
And what comes up for me there I is if we make small distinctions, just like we might make small distinctions to questions, if we make small distinctions, it gives us other permissions and possibilities. So for me, I made a distinction where I don't say male or female, I say masculine or feminine energy, because then that gives you permission. If you're, say, a male, you're like, oh, maybe you're in your, and, maybe you've been raised to behave in a certain way as a male. But if you acknowledge as a masculine energy, then there's also spaces where you can be feminine energy. And it's same also for, say women, like they can be masculine in certain spaces, they can be feminine in certain spaces. And by just making that slight distinction, for me, in my opinion, my experience, it gives it a little bit more permission or a way to access different emotions, because I'm not equating it to my gender, which is much harder to shift and change than it is to an energy, right?
Valid
It's
point.
for me.
Yeah, no, that's a valid point. And on this show, we've talked so many times. We've done whole episodes on masculine and feminine energies and how they're not necessarily tied to gender. And that is.
I know. I've listened to them. I've heard them. Yeah,
that is a whole other thing. But yeah, just more generally speaking, I think people understood what I meant when I said, us guys.
Totally. Yeah.
But it could be somebody that is definitely more in their masculine energy and not necessarily biologically male. So that is definitely possible. So, okay. I'm wondering if through all the work that you've done with these questions, if there's a particular area that you've seen where people tend to go wrong. Is there some common area where this process tends to sort of go off the tracks that you see regularly that maybe we could sort of upfront warn people about, like, hey, be careful about going off in this direction?
What I've seen, a pattern I've seen, is that there's usually one partner who wants to have the conversation and another who's a bit more apprehensive, right? And in general, I would say it's the feminine energy that wants to have the conversation, the masculine who's more reticent. However, what's interesting is once the conversation begins and there's a game set up, okay, you're going to ask each other these questions, and you don't have to answer any question you don't want, but you do have to ask each question. That's an important rule. Once the masculine energy is in that space, they are like, okay, because they like challenge and they step into challenge. Well, the challenge is we have to answer every question, or we have to go deep, or we have to do this. So then they're kind of more invested, right? Well, so the feminine brings in but what happens is that the more reticent, the one that's more reserved, or maybe is not, or more uncomfortable, or has greater fear, doesn't see the payoff in having the conversation with the partner. The partner who wants to have the conversation gets a bit angry. It's like, well, they're not doing this, or they're not doing it right, or they're not going as deep as I'd like them, or they're not, they're giving short sentences instead of a long, paragraphs of an answer. What I'd say is we have to let go. We have to let go and accept what is. And your partner, if they are in the space with you, maybe they're not as skilled at emotional articulation. That's what I've been calling it, emotional articulation, which is the ability to articulate your emotions, different than intelligence, emotional intelligence. Just, we're not all practicing it. Some are, we all have different love languages. But when you bring your partner to the table to have this kind of experience, or any kind of experience where you're really exploring and asking good questions in a space that cultivates this inquiry, accept where they're at. Don't, well, a lot of my directors, when, I train them to do the and, they do an and they call me after the first day and say, Topaz, it's not working. They're not having the conversations. No one's crying. It's like, well, hold on. It's like it is working. What's not working is that you have a perceived notion of how it should be, and it's not living up to how you think it should be. Get rid of that, accept it as what is. And it's beautiful for what is. Right.
Yeah. And
So,
that's,
yeah.
I just want to add to that. So, if you're the one that wants to have this conversation, keep in mind that this is a skill that's going to be cultivated over time. And it's not a one conversation time. Like, Topaz says, if we just have this conversation once, it will fix everything, right? Like, that's not what you're saying at all. So it's a conversation that you're going to have many times over, however long that you're together. You'll be, asking each other questions, all along the way, and you'll get better at it as it goes. But this idea that, you've got to answer all the questions and you've got to go super deep and you've got to, do all these things right from the get-go is really an unrealistic expectation, right? And if you put that pressure on it, you're not likely to get the result you want.
What's more profound and important than actually answering it is simply sitting in the space of the question. The rule that we have is you have to read every question out loud, but you don't have to answer anything you don't want. Because you can't put people in a corner and then expect them to behave normally. If you put someone in the corner, they're going to be defensive and they're not going to be. If you create an open space where they can walk away, they don't have to answer anything. They have a way out. They can be more expansive. They can be more present. They can feel safer, even though it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I would say that probably over time, like if you actually do voice these questions, and this isn't obviously not true for everybody, but it's definitely true for me. If you ask me these questions, even if I don't answer them in the context of that conversation, my brain's going to be thinking about those questions.
Exactly.
Until I come up with an answer, it could be days, it could be weeks, until the next my brain is going to be thinking about them. But that means that when we sit down to have that next conversation, I now actually have something to share.
Look, if you ask a question, let's say one of the questions in the book with your partner, and you're sitting there and you both decide you don't want to answer it, that's fine. It's not a problem at all. But what has happened is that you've both asked the question in your head. Right? You've asked it out loud, but then you've asked in your head, and then your mind will give you maybe three answers. One is what do you think they're going to say? What do you think it is? Right? What do you think they're not going to say? And you're already having the conversation in your head. Even though you both are not verbalizing it to each other. So what I'm saying is key is that to ask the question and to sit in the space of that together already is creating the space for you to explore together, is already creating the space for a more resilient relationship, even if it's uncomfortable. Because you're right, maybe the next time you sit down, well, you've been thinking about it, you've been feeling into it, and now you have more to share, right? But this partner, this other person, now not to be romantic, whoever you're having the conversation, your dad, your brother, your best friend, they're sitting in the space with you. They haven't run away. They're there. And maybe you're not articulating the answer right now, but you're sitting in the experience of asking the question, which reinforces your connection to them. And then maybe the answers will come later. That's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we are getting very close to the end of the show. I got a couple more questions I want to ask you. I'm curious also, is there any sort of aftercare that you recommend after you've had one of these conversations? Like, okay, we've gone through whatever questions we're going to go through for this. Is there anything that should be done to sort of close it out, aftercare, that sort of thing?
So, what's the book about? The book is about teaching you how to ride the bike. It's teaching you, because we don't learn this in schools. We basically learn from modeling from our families, maybe from our friend groups, how to have conversations. That's it. And fortunately, I've been privy to seeing this in the space, different than couples therapists where you have a therapist who's guiding and holding the space. This is two people having a conversation. And the two things I want to say is that if you're going to play the question of the book, what I say is don't stop the conversation in the middle. If you have to end the conversation and go to something else, go to the last two questions, because the last two questions help land the plane and wrap things up. So you're not ending the mid-conversation in the middle of a conflict, right? So I think in terms of aftercare, what I think versus aftercare is just continual practice. Set the time once a week, once a month, just like you did with your wife, once a year where you had a big conversation, really, where are we at? but to have a continual practice, a maintenance check. Because otherwise what happens is these kind of conversations or these kind of conflicts will come up because there's so much pain you cannot do anything else. Right. And then that becomes really difficult to have the conversation because there's so much pain. Right. It was even hardest in discomfort. It's just like exercise. You know, if I want to go climb Kilimanjaro tomorrow, well, the question, if I just go do it, I'm going to pull a hamstring. I'm going to be exhausted. I won't make it to the top. But if I practice and I've been, going on short jogs for a month, a year time, it's like when you see a marathon, when I see marathon, I'm crying from seeing all these people who are looks like they're worse shape than me, but they're running a marathon and I'm not. And what I know is that they didn't just wake up this morning and run the marathon. They've been practicing for 6 months. They've stretched, they've exercised, they've trained themselves. Are we doing the same in our relationships? Right?
Yeah.
If I want to go to a marathon tomorrow in my relationship, have I been training for the last 6 months? So the aftercare it's not like we're building up to a peak moment. What we're doing is creating the base level of maintenance so that our relationships can be elevated.
Absolutely. I would add to that, it's not really aftercare, but it's sort of along those lines, which is, making sure that when you're triggered, that's not the time to start the conversation, right? So this whole idea of like, have I been prepping myself properly through the training and through the repetition? And then just also knowing that the time that you, like, if you're in trigger in that moment, that's generally not the best time to start a conversation. So, letting those emotions settle down, bringing yourself back into right relation, and then having a good conversation. There was a point that you made along the way that reminded me of that. I just wanted to share that. Okay. So I had my list of all 12 questions here, and I highlighted a couple of them that I wanted to talk about, but I'm not surprised that we didn't get there.
There we are.
Oh yeah, you dropped off there for a moment.
Yeah, I dropped off for a moment.
Okay. Yeah. So I was just saying that I had the list of the 12 questions here because I thought we would talk about a couple of them. I even highlighted a few of the ones, but we really don't have time to go into that today. Do know that in the book, not only does it give you all of, how to set this up and how to do the, how to form good questions and create the space and all of that, it actually takes each one of these questions and explains more in depth, what is actually like why it's important and all of that kind of stuff. So you can find that in the book, which is the perfect segue into tell people how they can find out more about you, and if you want to talk about the Skin Deep, anything that you want the people to know about and where they can find it.
Well, thanks, Kevin. It's been great to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to share about the work that my team and I have been doing. The book is available anywhere you want. It's a hardcover. It's also an ebook and audiobook. It's available everywhere. And in terms of seeing our work and the ad videos that we've been talking about, just check out theskindeep.com. That's for all our products and experiences. And then all the social media channels, The Skin Deep. It's pretty easy to find.
Awesome. And those links are in the description, so you can find them down there. Okay. One last question, which is a question I ask everybody on the show. Since the whole episode is about asking questions, the question is, what is your best sexual talent? I gotta have my sound effects so I can have the Jeopardy music right going. Do, 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 do. There is no
I don't know if it's
answer.
a talent. Sorry. I'm not sure if it's a talent, but no, I don't. I think I'm learning a lot about my erotic self. And I think one thing I've been learning is that I've only learned one way to make love, with intense passion. And in some sense, like in the beginning of a relationship, that's like a superpower and it's wonderful and it's substantial. But then as a relationship evolves and changes, there's different sources of energy you want to draw from. And I've realized that I am not practiced there. And so it's interesting how in certain phases of a relationship, it's a superpower. And then later on, it becomes a kind of blind spot or a inability to explore other spaces. And so that's kind of what I'm wrestling lately in my own erotic and sexual journey.
Well, thank you. That was a very thoughtful answer. I really appreciated that. I think that, when it comes to that, the superpower is being able to do that long term in a long relationship, right? That's really this, like, if you can figure out how to keep that going throughout the length of your relationship, that's when it becomes a superpower, because that's when it takes effort. That's when it takes some work. So in the beginning, when those hormones are flowing hot and heavy, it's not too difficult to do, but later on it is. So I also want to say that it's not one of your 12 questions at all, but we did sort of model there a little bit about how that practice works, right? Asked an open-ended question, right? You actually listened to it, you really thought about it, and you reflected back something that was actually not a canned answer, something that was actually deep and thoughtful. And then we talked a little bit about that. So it's kind of cool how that worked. It's just a little mini example, not intended at all, but it worked out perfectly. So I hope that y'all got some value out of this. The idea of being able to ask good questions, better questions, to have a framework from which to have these conversations, I think is extremely valuable in any relationship. Of course, in your intimate relationship, but this model can work for other relationships too, family members, children, whatever. And I just think it is super, super valuable. It's why I really wanted to do this episode. And I hope that you, as the listener, see the value in it as well. One last time, I'd like to thank you, Topaz, for coming on and sharing all that you've learned from the years you've been doing this.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It's been great to be here. Thank you.
All right, everybody, that's all the time that I have for this episode, and I will see you next week. I hope you liked this episode of the Love Lab podcast. If you enjoyed this show, subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends. And for more free exclusive content, join me in the Passion Vault at kevinandceline.com/vault. That's kevinandceline.com/vault. Thanks for listening. And remember, as Celine used to say, you're amazing.